Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Thesis Council for the Defense of Thesis by Amirkhanian and Anastasia Grigoryevna for the degree of Candidate of Sociological Sciences, Specialty 220004, Social Structure, Social Institutes and Processes, on the theme Integration Strategies of Labor Migrants in Primorsky region by example of Chinese natives. By the order of St. Petersburg University, on the 1st of September 2020, number 7581/1, me, Diryugin Pavel Petrovich, Doctor of Sociological Sciences, Professor of the Department of Applied and Branch Sociology of St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Other members of the Dissertation Council were appointed by the same order, and let me introduce them to you. In the remote access mode, we have Grigoryeva Irina Andreevna. Good evening. Doctor of Sociology, Professor of the Department of Theory and Practice of Social Work of St. Petersburg University. Can you see and hear us? Can you see us and hear us well, please? Yes, that's true. Thank you. Grund Elena Viktorovna, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Applied Sociology of the Urals Federal University, named after first President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. Can you see and hear us well? Yes, good evening. Thank you. Starshinova Alevtina Viktorovna, Doctor of Sociology, Professor of the Social Work Department of the Urals Federal University, named after the first President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. Can you see and hear us well? Yes. All is well, thank you. Agachanyan Viktor Sergeyevich, PhD, Professor of University of California, Los Angeles, United States of America. Can you see and hear as well, Viktor Sergeyevich? Yes, you can hear us. The sound is gone. The sound is gone. We can't hear you anymore. I beg your pardon, Viktor Sergeyevich. Can you hear us? No, he cannot. Then we have, let me, no, I can't hear anything. Pavel Petrovich, I could not hear you before. Can you hear us now? It's hard. We can't hear Pavel Petrovich well enough. Let me continue with your permission. The degree applicant, Amirkhanian Anastasia Grigoryevna, is also present. Also, the academic advisor, the degree applicant, Borotkina Olga Ivanina, Doctor of Sociology, Associate Professor of the Department of Theory and Practice of Social Work of St. Petersburg University. To improve the quality of communication, dear colleagues working in the remote access mode, please remember to switch off the microphones, but remember to but please keep your microphones on. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast online on St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English or from English into Russian. During the live broadcast of the Dissertation Council session, at the moment, an email is displayed to which, during the session, all the listeners may send their opinion and send questions to the applicant online regarding her thesis and the ongoing discussion of her speech. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical support department, and I shall read them during the discussion. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and the contents of her thesis, and it's necessary to indicate the full name, position, and place of employment of the author. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion of the thesis, its text, and assessment of the thesis shall not be presented. In accordance with the order of awarding academic degree of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences at St. Petersburg University, approved by the local regulations, hereinafter referred to as the order, a session of the Dissertation Council shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved members of the Council, but not less than 4 persons, are present. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 members. All 5 members are present, including 4 Council members working the remote access mode. Audio-visual contact has been established with all the Council members. Thus, we have the quorum. Let me set forth the following procedure of today's session of the Dissertation Council with a total approximate duration of 2 hours. Let's stick to this. A summary report of the chairman on documents submitted by the degree applicant and their compliance with the applicable regulations. Answers to possible questions, 5 minutes. Summary report of the degree applicant outlining the key points of her study. You will have 15 minutes for this. 3. Questions to the degree applicant strictly on her report, no more than 2 minutes per question. 4. Answers of the applicant to the questions, no more than 5 minutes for all the questions. Is that okay? 5. Speeches of the Dissertation Council members in turn with their assessment of the thesis and the applicant's speech with a summary of their positions, questions, and suggestions to the applicant. Approximately, each speaker will have 10 minutes. 6. Speech of the chairman with his assessment of the thesis. Approximately 10 minutes. Answers of the degree applicant to questions and remarks made by the council members, not more than 20 minutes. Open discussion that will include speeches of the attendees with summaries of their positions and/or specific questions and suggestions to the applicant strictly on the theme of the study, no more than 2 minutes for each speaker. At that, all the speakers are kindly requested to register themselves and fully introduce themselves before speaking. 9. Presentation of questions to the applicant sent during the discussion of a speech and the scientific discussion via internet at the St. Petersburg University website. Answers of the applicant, not more than 2 minutes per question. Next, speech of the academic advisor of the applicant, not more than 3 minutes. Next, discussion of the council members before the open voting of the defense results. For that period, the sound shall be switched off, 5 minutes. Next, open individual voting. Votes shall be counted by the chairman and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. 14. Make a decision on awarding or not awarding academic degree to the applicant. And 15. Closing remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have any objections to this procedure? Or objections, maybe? If there are no objections, let us proceed to the first item. The summary report of the chairman. The thesis by Amirkhanian Anastasia Grigoryevna for the degree of Candidate of Sociological Sciences, Specialty 220004, Social Structure, Social Institutes and Processes on the theme Integration Strategies of Labor Migrants in Primorsky region by example of Chinese natives, was accepted for defense by the Order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 27th of August 2020, number 7439/1. I have here, can you see, dear colleagues, can you see? That's how the theses are formatted these days. Amirkhanian Anastasia Grigoryevna wrote her thesis at St. Petersburg University under the guidance of Doctor of Sociology, Associate Professor of the Department of Theory and Practice of Social Work at St. Petersburg University, Borodkina Olga Ivanovna. She is present. She's now with us. The number of publications of the applicant which set forth the main results of the thesis according to the enclosed list is 18. in peer-reviewed journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Science and Education, Russian Federation, 4 publications. In publications in the scientific databases, Data of Web of Science and Scopus, 3 publications. The applicant submitted to the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University a full set of documents for acceptance of the thesis for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are stored in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the office of the Dissertation Council Activities Support Department, who is now present here. Before I give the floor to the degree applicant, do you, dear council members, have any general questions to the degree applicant? And is it necessary to read and review the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant? What do you think? I don't think there's much sense to do that. Then let us give the floor to the degree applicant. Please remember you have 15 minutes for your speech. Anastasia Grigoryevna, please make your report. Thank you very much, Pavel Petrovich. Dear Chairman, dear Council members, good evening and good morning. Let me offer to your attention a candidate's thesis on integration strategies of labor migrants in Primorsky region by the example of Chinese natives. According to UN estimates, in 2019, 272 million of labor migrants, as compared with 2010, the increase of 51 million people. By annual, the Russia Federation takes the 4th place. At the moment, there are approximately 12 million of international migrants. China occupies the 3rd place with 11 million migrants living outside of China. One of the most interesting regions of Russia in terms of studying migration is the Far East, and in particular Primorsky region, represented by migrants from the CIS states and from China. The issues of international migrants' integration are significant all over the world. Both migrant and host communities are heterogeneous. Accordingly, the integration process vary greatly. Migration processes in the Far East were covered in the works of both domestic and foreign researchers. A significant part of these works is dedicated to the social and economic aspects. Moreover, until recently, the process of forming the Chinese diaspora in the region was actively studied. However, there is a lack of comprehensive study of the social integration of migrants in the local community at the regional level, which led to the choice of goals and objectives and determined the object and subject of my study. The object of my study is the social integration of the international labor migrants in Primorsky region. The subject is strategies of social integration of international migrants in Primorsky region. In Primorsky region, objectives of the study included analysis of the theoretical concept of social integration, identification of the main models of social integration, development of a model of social integration of international migrants, and the role of the labor migration from China, development of the region, as well as the main factors determine the strategy of social integration of international migrants in Primorsky region. The goal, objectives, and logic of the study determine its structure and volume, which consists of an introduction, 3 chapters, conclusion, and a list of literature and annexes. When developing the plan, we set the following hypothesis. At present, there are qualitative changes in the structure of the international migration in Primorsky region, which is manifested in reduction of migration flows from China and increase of migrants from the CIS states. Changes in the structure of migration flows affect the existing integration mechanism. Migrants from China have limited access to the most important social institutions, such as the labor market, healthcare system, and cultural institutions, and adhere to an isolation strategy, which is characterized by the development of social ties, mainly with compatriots. At the same time, labor migrants from CIS have a higher potential for integration. They have a wider range of resources to ensure access to social institutions and are more open to establishing social ties with the host community. The theoretical and methodological basis of my study consists of classical works as well as works of contemporary authors. The thesis was based on the institutional approach. The works of Yasmin Soysal and Harry Freeman were used as a theoretical methodological basis. The empirical basis for this study includes data collected in the course of the original study aimed at integration of migrants from China and the CIS, conducted by interviews and study of barriers and factors that facilitate the integration of migrants, conducted by a method of expert interviews. Empirical includes data obtained from research conducted as part of the project Social Risks of International Youth Migration in Modern Russia. This project was carried out with the support of the Russian Science Foundation. Novelty of the study lies in the following. But the concept of social integration was clarified. The concept of migration integration strategy was defined. Assimilation, mixed, and isolationist strategies were identified. The author's own institutional model of social integration, the main directions of international migration, Primorsky region revealed. The main factors that determine strategies of social integration, as well as the main barriers that hinder successful integration of migrants, been identified. A comparative analysis of integration of migrants from CIS states and migrants from China in Primorsky region by such indicators as adaptation attitudes and behavior practices was carried out. Let me present provisions to be defended according to the logic of solving the main tasks of the thesis. Social integration of international migrant is a process of including migrants in the social institutions of the host society. Of special importance is the inclusion of the economic migrants in the labor market and availability of access to the healthcare system as the most important institutions for the integration of migrants. Strategies are understood as a set of attitudes and practices aimed at gaining access to meaningful social institutions. From these positions, assimilation, isolationist, and mixed strategies can be identified. To analyze social integration of Chinese migrants, the most promising is the institutional model of integration, according to which integration is understood as a process of ensuring access to the main social institutions, such as the labor market, healthcare, culture, institutions, etc. We developed the common practice of integration through informal networks. Support networks is not always optimal, and migrants are often at risk of being outside the legal framework or in isolation. For this reason, it seems appropriate to develop the alternative support resources. Implementation of this model supposes interaction with NGOs, state, national diasporas, as well as through the migrants' communities with recent experience in the region. In Primorsky region, there have been changes both in the structure of migration flows and in volume. Transmigration manifests itself in frequent travels of migrants between the countries of origin and destination. It prevails over the final immigration. The notion of partial integration most accurately describes the integration of migrants, which occurs through inclusion of the social institutions while maintaining connection with the country of origin. Integration of migrants from China occurs, first of all, in the sphere of activity. Access to other important social institutions, including the healthcare system, is complicated and practically not realized without the help of intermediaries. Migrants from CIS states also face a number of challenges when integrating into the social institutions, but they're actively using social support from their compatriots to overcome such barriers. The CIS migrants are more integrated into the local community, in terms of such indicators: employment, availability, or lack of experience in employment into medical institutions, and social ties with local residents. The most obvious reason for this is in their level of Russian language proficiency. Comparison of adaptation attitudes and behavior practices of Chinese migrants with those from China to a greater allows us to assert the following: migrants from China to a greater extent share isolation strategy of integration, which you can see here, characteristics of the circle of the communication circle, characteristics of indicator of employment, allow us to that migrants from China pursue the isolation strategy, which is manifested in their intention to work in Russia but live in Russia, and they have the same intentions regard to China, while and at leisure, during their leisure time, migrants from China do not interact with the local population. They mostly integrating with compatriots. They hardly ever become involved in any activities with the local regions. Migrants from CIS countries have more intention to stay in Russia. Such lifestyle is also desirable for their children. They interact more with the residents. Social support networks include family members, friends, who include compatriots and local residents. In conclusion, we gave some recommendations for development of the integration mechanism in Primorsky region. It's necessary to develop cooperation between the non-profit organizations that provide services to migrants and the government agencies responsible for migration policy. It's necessary, establishing and strengthening the intercultural cooperation means creating cross-cultural programs. Migrants and the local population should be involved as participants in such programs, thus creating conditions for communication between people of different nationalities with various experiences, traditions and customs, and ideas about norms and values. The main results of my study were presented and discussed at Russian and international scientific conferences and were published in 18 papers, including 4 publications in journals from the list of publications recommended by Ministry of Science, and publications including international databases, including Q1 level journals. The results of the thesis are included in chapters of monographs which I co-authored in Russian and English. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you, Anastasia Grigoryevna. You were on time. Now is the time to ask your questions, questions related to her speech. Dear Council members, do you have any questions at this point? Irina Andreevna. The floor is given to Irina Andreevna Grigorieva. We can't hear you, Irina Andreevna. Oh, I see. Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, now we can hear you. May I ask, you said the isolationist integration strategy. In my opinion, this term is absurd, because if that is an isolation, in case of isolation strategy, can we talk or should we talk about integration? Could you please explain the need for this term? Indeed, at first glance, there is some contradiction, but it should be said that inclusion in the institutions of the host state may occur on different levels, and the connections, while the connection with the country of origin are preserved, and inclusion in the institutions of the receiving community, which are not guaranteed by the legislation of the host country, including through informal ties, create unfavorable situations for inclusion of migrants, and because of that, I talk about the isolationist model. When workers are integrated in the host society, they seek support from in the internal ties. If we talk about China, that is a very good example. Hopefully I answered your question. Irina Andreevna, thank you. Yelena Viktorovna. Anastasia Grigoryevna, will you please tell us if there are any programs in Primorsky region, programs for integration of migrants from China, or such programs are already available? Thank you, Yelena Viktorovna, for your question. At the moment, there are some programs for training courses of Russian, but these programs are characterized by the fact that they are just emerging, they are just starting, and in the cultural sense, it's necessary to say that Primorsky region is a multinational region, and very often there are various festivals. Non-commercial organizations promote cultures of origin where residents came from originally, and that is an important element of migrants' integration in the sphere of culture, but not always coincides with their interests. I mean, the interests of recent migrants. Have I answered your question? Yes, thank you very much. Yelena Viktorovna, your question. Aleftina Viktorovna, your question, please. Anastasia Grigoryevna, could you please tell us, how do you explain you talk about healthcare as the main institution? You talk about that a lot in your thesis as the main institute of integration of labor migrants. Don't talk about why not culture or education, though you admit that a good command of the language makes integration easier. Thank you, Aleftina Viktorovna, for your question. Healthcare is a very important institution where we need to make additional effort to make it accessible for migrants. This is connected with the fact that if you look at what is happening now, it's very important that people near us, no matter where they come from, it's very important for them to stay healthy, because our health and the health of our families depends on that. And migrants and their health determines or affects health of the population of the receiving region. That's why, in my opinion, it's very important to get access to this institution. Thank you. Aleftina Viktorovna, are you satisfied? Yes, thank you. Viktor Sergeyevich, welcome. Thank you for your speech. And in your report and in your thesis, I saw or I felt some emphasis on the change, or changing the composition of migrants and some change in the strategy. But in your report, this trend was not demonstrated. Maybe your data is not sufficient, or maybe I missed your opinion on this, but I would like to know what you think about such trends and the possible explanation of these changes. Thank you very much, Viktor Sergeyevich, for your question. Indeed, the changes in migration flows from China are very noticeable even to a non-expert. But my strategy, the theoretical framework, allow us to see that indeed the presence of Chinese entrepreneurs is changing. Now they spend less time in the region. Now they prefer to go to work through intermediaries for doing businesses and to do businesses through them. And that is typical not only for Primorsky region. If earlier we could talk about the physical unwillingness to interact with the local residents, caution when interacting with the local residents through intermediaries, now we can see that they spend less time in the region. Their physical presence is going down, and no institutions were created to keep migrants from China in the region because of devaluation of ruble. Migrants from China have less motivation to come to the region to do business there. Have I answered your question? As I understood, it seems to me that there is some connection between between quality and quantity. The isolationist strategy leads to self-exclusion in its extreme form. Yes, you may say that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this question. Thank you, Viktor Sergeyevich. Is anyone else willing to speak, to ask questions? No? Then may I ask a question? There are 3 groups of migrants from China which are integrated in different types. The Moscow group, who have their own integration strategies, St. Petersburg group, and then the Primorsky region is the 3rd group. In your thesis, have you observed such peculiarities? You may see how the Chinese natives become integrated in. Let's take a technical break. Please. Viktor Sergeyevich, please start your camera. Viktor Sergeyevich, welcome back. Let me repeat my question. My integration strategies or peculiarities you may see in Primorsky region in the Far East, in St. Petersburg, and in Moscow. Pavel Petrovich, thank you very much for your question. Indeed, by the results of expert interviews, we may conclude that the first waves of migration are characterized by adventurers. These are people who have high level of education. They are open to everything new. At first, they come to Primorsky region and started their businesses there, but after some complications occur and the opportunities to make money reduced, the many migrants from China who knew Russian well, who were well integrated, some of them married local residents, so they left the region. They left for Moscow, where they had more opportunities to run their businesses. Thus, we may conclude that the most well-integrated people, migrants from Chinese natives, now reside in Moscow. At the same time, in Primorsky region, until recently and right now, most migrants have less education. Besides, they come from nearby provinces, Heludan province, and it should be said that over the time some structural changes have occurred. I mean, the number of migrants in construction industry decreased. The number of folk trade also decreased, but the number of students has increased. And in Primorsky region, because of the ruble devaluation, we saw the increase of tourists, in the number of tourists. Do you agree with the opinion which will be discussed at the Moscow University of International Relations, that today we reached the stage of reintegration of Chinese migrants in major cities? So those who came 20 years ago, now only those involved in trade have remained in Moscow and St. Petersburg, those whose businesses are profitable. But as for, I mean, again, I'm talking about trade. No, not necessarily trade. There are businesses in healthcare or medical doctors offering their own service, offering their services of Oriental medicine, very popular in Primorsky region. And since the number of public healthcare institutions is limited, another popular Oriental medicine is also popular. I have one more question for you, because this theme is very close to me. If the values of Chinese migrants and how do they coincide with the values of the local residents? How do they feel, how the local residents feel about integration of Chinese natives? Now China is a very fast developing country. It should be noted that residents of Primorsky region often travel to China for various services. And of course, there are some worries, and in everyday life, the ordinary people contact migrants from China. At least that happened in 2019. Very well, thank you. More questions, if any, dear colleagues? Members of the Dissertation Council. Welcome, Viktor Sergeyevich. Right now, at least in the US, studies of migration, much attention is paid to the race aspect of the immigration trends and relations. Could you, to what degree, to what extent that is important for receiving immigrants and their integration? Thank you, Viktor Sergeyevich, for your question. Due to the recent events, there are some worries regarding people who look Chinese. This is the same applies to representatives of or local residents, and that is why it seems appropriate to study how such attitudes could be changed. And I think at the moment that is a very important field of studies. Are you satisfied with the answer? Very well, thank you. Dear Council members, do you have more questions? Thank you. Then I thank you. Now let us hear the speeches of the Dissertation Council members. Let me tell you that since our reviews were published at St. Petersburg University website, and everyone had the opportunity to read the reviews, so we in our speeches, and the order of speaking can be any random. So if anyone is willing to start, you are welcome to do so. The chairman will be the last one to speak, and anyone can start. Please appoint speakers. I remember my time in the army. Should I? Well, who will start? Let's follow the list. Okay. Viktor Sergeyevich, will you please start? Of course. I'm used to that since my family name starts with an A. And I hope that does not mean that my review or my opinion is the most important one. First, I would like to repeat my opinion. I sent my specific comments and suggestions to the author separately. Hopefully she found them useful or will find them useful in the future. I think that is a very thorough analysis, which I was very impressed by the amount and quality of the data and by the comparison of the two groups, two conglomerates of Chinese natives and CIS natives. This comparison, in my opinion, is very useful and very informative. It seems to me that this thesis makes a significant contribution to the study of international migration in the region and in Russia in general, and international migration literature. It would be interesting from my foreign perspective. It would be interesting to take a look at how, at this specific migration context, as compared with what is happening in other parts of the world. And the author touches upon this, but considering that the amount of materials to be studied, it's hard, of course, obviously, to increase that part. It would be hard to increase that chapter of the study, but this comparative aspect would be highly informative, and in that sense, this thesis has a great potential as a contribution to this literature. I had some questions regarding the technical aspects, data. I work a lot with, so I would like the author to be a little bit more careful with representation assessment without diminishing their significance and value, but considering how this data was collected, it's necessary to be more careful with assessment and conclusions made by the author on the basis of this data. This is my review, the key points of my review. Dear colleagues, our reviews, in the end, we should always make suggestions of our reviews. We should make some suggestions. So you should come up with some suggestions. I suggest by, you mean, in the some improve, you mean as to improve the I believe that, as I said, it would make sense to strengthen the comparative aspect, at least in the conclusion, in comparison with the other migration contexts, and more careful assessment of data quality and invaluable limitations that the data have. I'm not saying they have no value, but it's always necessary to be aware of such limitations. And also, I was very impressed with the theoretical introduction of the thesis. That bridge between theory and practice, the study, is quite narrow. I would like to see more dialogue between the theoretical and the practical parts of the thank you. Hopefully that's I said what I was expected to say. Dear colleagues, we have to agree if our applicant will answer all our suggestions at once, or would you like to answer the questions individually? Would you like to answer each council member individually? Yes. I'd like to answer each council member individually. This is up to the applicant to decide. Dear Viktor Sergeyevich, so you remember in every review contains some critical remarks. Viktor Sergeyevich, thank you for your careful attitude to my work. It's necessary to say that I've done everything I could to ensure representativeness of both of the Chinese of both samples. But it should be said that the conditions under which I conducted my study, among the CS migrants was conducted on the basis of an organization that supports migrants and provides legal support. So here the sample was limited, that migrants without documents would hardly be included in this sample. Then there was certain imbalance of residents of Tajikistan in this sample, because this organization was on the basis of which I conducted my study. All the clients of this organization are the migrants who came there from Nakhodka, Vladivostok, Artyom, Ussurisk, from all those cities. People work in these cities. They came there for support. They all were offered to take part in the study, and only those who agreed were included in our sample. It's also necessary to say that my study was conducted at 7 locations where, as we found earlier, the chances of meeting Chinese migrants were higher. So the interviews were conducted in all locations, such as markets and residential places of residence. We suggested all of them to take part in our study. Not all of them agreed. And considering the seasonal nature, interviews were conducted in summer, winter, and autumn. I believe there is some relation between the interviewed population, but we never rewarded migrants for taking part in the study, so they were not motivated to participate in our study again. I see that, Viktor Sergeyevich, I would like to emphasize that I appreciate your data very much, and in any, of course, the data in any study have limitations, and we should be aware of these limitations. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so you will answer each reviewer individually. Please have a seat and try to make your answers short. So next, who will be the next speaker? Let us follow the alphabetical order. Aleftina Andreevna, I have a very positive of Anastasia Grigoryevna's work. I think it has theoretical and empirical significance that should be present in the candidate's thesis. The theoretical sources are truly interesting. The literature overview is quite comprehensive, and in that sense, the work is really good. Its obvious advantage is, well, an exhaustive study of migrants from China in Primorsky region. Our doctoral students, since I had lots of experience in the sphere migration, they have mostly studied migration in St. Petersburg, no matter where the migrants originally came from. So it's very interesting in that sense. Well, the task was challenging and interesting, and well, the comparative aspect is very interesting. The author tries to compare the intentions of integration between migrants from China and the CIS countries and their preferences, their specific preferences, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to take a look at intentions and plans, not only of the migrants, but not only about themselves, but about their children and how they could be integrated in the social and economic environment in Russia, how, to what extent, etc. And of course, we may see that Chinese migration to Russia is very different from European migration, where Chinese quotas appeared in China. Is very dispersed, and maybe that's because of the isolationist nature. That's the main focus. Also, I would like to make a remark since Anastasia Grigoryevna switched to the comparative study, to comparing the Chinese migrants and the CS migrants. So maybe it would make sense to pay more attention to theses defended by those migrants and works conducted by the Center of Independent Studies, Brednikova, Kondakov, and Pashenkov. All of them conducted very interesting studies about migrants from Tajikistan, but that's a very small remark aimed at widening the borders, because every paper has its limits, and if Anastasia Grigoryevna wishes to continue her research, so maybe the borders can be widened in this direction. And as the only comment which the author does not touch upon, the population of China is aging now. Does that have any impact on the age structure of the migrants' population and on the reproduction of the Chinese population? So maybe Anastasia Grigoryevna will comment this question of mine. I think it is very interesting because the aging trends started 20-something years ago. So before migration was migration of young people, but in conclusion, traditionally, I think we have to say that the thesis deserves recognition, that the thesis is a success. The author deserves the degree of candidate of sociology and corresponds to the requirements, etc., and corresponds to the requirements of specialty 220004, which appears to be very important because our practices are. So hopefully I mentioned everything. Okay, let us discuss your suggestions. Thank you. Anastasia Grigoryevna, please. Irina Andreevna, thank you for your remarks. Indeed, in my work, there is not enough emphasis on how aging can affect migration to Primorsky region. It's necessary to say that aging means the growth of population, and China is working hard to increase the possibilities of employment for the elderly. China is introducing a number of measures for this. Speaking of Russia, in this case, such measures are not sufficient, and not many, and it should be said that the existing situation in the end will lead to reduction of labor, to the reduction of labor migrants from China in the form it exists now. We will see changes in this structure, but in the end, I think the number of labor migrants will decrease. Thank you very much. Irina Andreevna, are you satisfied? Thank you. Next, let's give the floor to Alevtina Viktorovna. Dear colleagues, I agree with the opinion of my colleagues in their assessment of Anastasia Grigoryevna's work. I also think that is an independent, interesting, and very relevant, highly relevant study of a problem that is relevant for modern Russia and for the world as a whole, for the whole world, for the contemporary world. And I'd like to mention a number of advantages. An obvious advantage of this work is a well-written theoretical and methodological basis of this study. The author defines the basic concepts very logically, and that became the methodological basis for further assessment of migrant integration strategy and for construction of a social model, created later by the author. What seemed important to me, so here maybe I disagree with Viktor Sergeyevich here, that the categorization tools work well in chapter 2 for analysis of migrants from China. The author uses categories or terms developed in the theoretical chapter. What also impressed me is the erudition of vast knowledge. 182 sources, 70 sources in foreign languages, which on the one hand demonstrates her wide knowledge and thorough study of the theory, and it's also the study method, the use of qualitative and quantitative strategies enabled the author to study the problem in depth, to obtain a good database. And also what I liked, what appeals to me, is that it was very well used methodologically. Not the Russian language, nor the English, neither Russian nor English are the main languages for the migrants. We know how poorly they speak Russian and English. So what is interesting, Anastasia Grigoryevna used the Chinese in her interviews, which made it easier for the Chinese participants. And certainly I may talk for a long time, but we don't have the time. I think a lot was said by my colleagues. I would like to mention the strong point that appeals to me, the institutional model, the strategy. So the thesis is an independent, interesting, and relevant study of the integration strategies, and yet I'd like to make a number of remarks. Obviously, hopefully, the thesis has a future, and Anastasia Grigoryevna will continue her work. What is missing is good comparative analysis. Well, there is. The thesis contains analysis of the integration strategies of CS natives and who are also present in Primorsky region, and of Chinese natives. What is the difference and what do they have in common? I feel it would it makes sense to pay more attention to this. So the factor analysis is also missing. The author discusses factors, but they are scattered through the text. The factor analysis is the theme of the future. It's very interesting. And once again, I have a high opinion of the thesis, and I believe the work is successful, and Anastasia Grigoryevna may be awarded the degree, and the work deserves this degree to be awarded to the applicant. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Elena Victorovna, thank you for your recommendations. I should say that for analysis, we chose characteristics that help to illustrate differences in the integration strategies. It should be said that among the key factors that affect the isolationist strategy is the absence of institutions responsible responding to the migrants' interests. And among the factors that have impact over the isolationist strategy, there are close links with the country of origin and the presence of very strong measures that limit to some degree the inclusion of migrants in the labor institutions and the healthcare system. If we are talking about the assimilation strategy, so this strategy was affected by the fact that in the receiving region already had institutions that agree with the migrants' interests. So this made it easier for the migrants to get integrated in the existing institutions. So they were more oriented to seeking support from the outside. I think this had some impact on the assimilation strategy of integration. Are you satisfied, Alevtina Viktorovna? Alevtina Viktorovna, the floor is yours. Thank you, and good evening, dear colleagues. In the beginning, I would like to say that I support Anastasia Grigoryevna's thesis, which I liked. First of all, why did I like it? As it has already been said, the first chapter, the theoretical chapter, is very interesting, very informative, rich in various approaches and analysis of the position. It demonstrates the high level of analysis. Most of all, I liked that this combination of macro and micro levels of the factors that define social integration of international labor migrants. It was very interesting, a very interesting line where the author continues to analyze the Primorsky region and tests this model using such interesting issues of old diaspora to be found in Primorsky region on current labor migrants and new diaspora, and asks the question not about the external and internal factors affecting integration, but about the wish of the migrants themselves to get integrated in the local communities. So this wish is affected by the inevitable barriers, legal regulations, and the author very successfully introduces the idea that NGOs today have the capacity to fill in the gaps in such a complex process of social integration. So I like this comprehensive model with the inclusion of new elements and which was very logical. Everything that affects this integration. The theoretical model illustrates well, as we have already mentioned, is well illustrated with the empirical material, with qualitative and quantitative data. And despite the fact that migration is getting lots of attention in social studies, national and international, all these theoretical and methodological approaches enabled the author to make a contribution, to add something new, and enabled her to create a new model, institutional model of migrant integration. At the same time, I got some questions. By no accident, I asked why the three institutions included in the institutional model, she focuses on healthcare. If we look at the empirical material, it is not obvious. Do they get sick? More obvious, or maybe they are more concerned about their health, or maybe but she's not discussing this. In connection with this, I still have the question, why have you chosen this institution as the institution that impacts migration of Chinese natives? Also, I'd like to clarify Anastasia, the following. Anastasia Grigoryevna discusses the following factors when talking about healthcare as availability of medical policy, knowledge where to seek medical help. And though she describes fairly well Primorsky region, she's not talking how open these, how accessible these healthcare institutions are for the migrants geographically. And so this issue she doesn't touch upon. My second question is connected with section 3.2, when the empirical part, analyzing institutions of integration. She says that specifically there are some social support institutions. So what exactly you mean by this? So is this institutions that provide social services, provide material support? So it would be interesting to understand what you mean by the social support institutions. Next, my next point, speaking of, since I have to make suggestions, the conceptual approach of the author. In the beginning of the thesis, you explain the choice of migrants in Primorsky region, though you explain that you talk about the migrants from China. In the explanation, you said that migration from China is decreasing, while the number of migrants from CIS countries is increasing. And you said that these migrants have more potential for integration. So that was a very interesting start. But then you never got back to this idea, and it would be, while it would be very interesting to discuss the prospects of such migrants, at least in your speech, while you are defending your very successful work. So the results, your ability to systematize, to analyze the material, give us the reasons to conclude that your thesis deserves the desired degree of candidate of sociological sciences, and I support this thesis. Thank you. Thank you, Alevtina Viktorovna. Alevtina Viktorovna, thank you for your questions. First, indeed, availability of medical institutions is a very important criteria by which we can judge on availability of the healthcare system, which I do not explore in my work because it's not specific for the migrant population, and the local residents are using the same healthcare institutions. Yet, let me answer your second question. Migrants from China, because of the language limitations and barriers, and the language barrier they find themselves in a situation where they contact healthcare institutions through intermediaries. So the study of the Institute of Intermediaries has great significance for future research. How do intermediaries provide support to migrants? More research in this field would be very interesting. And in addition to that, you asked me about representation, about the migrant support institutions in Primorsky region. As a result of expert interviews, we found that NGOs and ethnic organizations, so-called diaspora organizations, are support providers in this region. Thank you. Alevtina Viktorovna, are you satisfied? Thank you. Please have a seat. Dear colleagues, now it's time for my speech. And since a lot of what I was going to say has already been said, so let me focus on some points of the work to be analyzed, because such a systematic approach in the candidate's thesis is rare. So obviously, the author has good command of theory and practice, and relies on multiple national, international sources on micro and on qualitative and quantitative methods. And what I particularly liked, so that all these elements are interconnected. As Viktor Sergeyevich mentioned, this narrow bridge between the theoretical part, theoretical concept and practice that our applicant managed to analyze. And I think as an applied scientist, I like that this happened in Primorsky region. I spent some time there as a part of my life there. Irina Andreevna, please, I'm here. Otherwise, we'll have to take a technical break. Hold on, I'm here. Thank you. Otherwise, you won't. You will never learn that I was in the Navy, and I have a very good understanding of this situation when our compatriots are trying to want to go to Europe, and many Chinese natives want to come here to work. And the events in Khabarovsk, so from the point of, since such a study can serve the political and managerial interests and social work is beyond any doubt, so that is a great, and that is very important that our doctoral students can analyze this situation in Primorsky region, which is so remote. So that is a certain advantage of the thesis, where, and somebody mentioned that already, so where is migration studied? In Moscow and St. Petersburg. So that's where the situation is explored. But Russia is a large country, and it's a huge country, so it's so well that a doctoral student from St. Petersburg has studied this complex problem. The scientific basis is very solid. I think this is this was an important contribution of the academic advisor. Along with that, I made 3 questions that I would like you to ask. Well, my first remark is this. So you talk about migration or integration strategies. So I will learn, so I expected to learn about the interaction of Chinese natives and the local residents and how these integration strategies, sociology studies interaction. But sometimes when you talk about strategies, you start reading, talking about practices, not strategies. So strategies, something you have for a longer period of time. So what are the types of these strategies? Or assault, or frozen, or what are the types? What are the... So that would be a very... So maybe pay attention to this in the future. For example, Merton talks about interaction. So environment and the man, environment and interaction. These two things cannot exist without, separately, but that does not decrease the affected level of the work. The work gives so many integration models that we may several social groups can be identified as so that would be very interesting for a teacher of sociology to so this can be used in teaching, in our teaching practice. And as many of us are interested in cooperation with China right now, my study is going on in China. So I want to talk about the situation we faced at a conference in China, where a Chinese speaker who explored the attitude of Russian natives to Chinese visitors in Russia. And so she said that it's getting more and more difficult for us. Our attempts often meet with such disagreement of attitudes. So that's a very interesting issue. So then you can reach the high levels of policy and of social work. And I have one more comment in relation with this. Subject, our department is empirical. If you start talking about strategies, strategies should be included in the list of goals or objectives. And I believe that you should continue exploring this topic, and especially from the point of strategies, integration strategies. They deserve a special theoretical study because the term integration strategies is very common, but the definition of integration strategies is still missing. Authors are talking about some acts of integration or practices of integration, but there's no theoretical understanding of what an integration strategy is. I think the work is conceptual, with rich material, written in good scientific or classical style. Maybe some of you won't like it, but I think that is an advantage of every work. The style demonstrates good results, and the work and good prospects of the work. I would like to finish here, and so please answer my questions about strategy and the link methodology. Pavel Petrovich, thank you very much for your recommendations. Indeed, in this work, the integration model and integration strategy are connected. The model of integration is a mechanism for integration, while the strategy is the adaptation, intentions, and practices aimed at inclusion of social institutions of the receiving community. Your recommendations I will certainly consider in my future work. As for how Chinese migrants feel about how they are being treated, even those with good command of Russian don't want to stay here, which I can also see here. So here, like, is more, you see more opportunities to get a good job. They want to go back, even though they spent a lot on getting included in the local culture and getting good jobs, because the economic conditions do not provide the conditions they look for in Russia. Have I answered your questions? Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Have a seat, please. Dear colleagues, we have not received any external reviews, right? So these are all the reviews to be presented. Now, the next point, once again, we have to ask, do we have any questions to Anastasia Grigoryevna, or everything is clear? Then let us move on. And now, is anyone present willing to speak? They have a whole 2 minutes for this. If yes, please introduce yourself, starting with your position. Good evening, dear council, dear jury, dear members. I'm Romanenko Vernika, candidate of sociological science of St. Petersburg University, researcher at St. Petersburg University. Very briefly, I would like to support Anastasia in her work, because I am working with migration issues, and the Far East district is very interesting. That's a very unusual region with great investment and migration potential. And though in some regions people are making more than people in Moscow, and it has always been interesting for me why this situation happens compared with foreign states. And I think Anastasia has given us some questions from the methodological point, empirical point, theoretical point. She provided some interesting conclusions, and in the end of her work, she provided some recommendations for NGOs and immigration services for integration of migrants. I think this knowledge can be useful for a very wide audience. When I analyzed content of mass media on migration, I came across a very negative feeling about the migrants from China. They come, they exhausting our resources, our mineral resources, and Anastasia made it obvious. So they don't really want to stay with us. They have a different strategy, and they have their own adaptation processes. And now the number of migrants is decreasing. That is good to know. This information is really new, and I think these results are very worthy for the society and for science and for our discussion. Thank you. I suggest to support the work. Thank you. Dear colleagues, now maybe we received any questions online. We received no questions by email. So let us move on to the next item of our agenda. Now is the time for the academic advisor to speak. Let Olga Ivanovna talk about the work of the applicant and her role as the advisor. Dear colleagues, dear council members, dear guests, dear applicant, I will try to keep my speech very short. First of all, as the academic advisor, I am satisfied to say that the work is really a success. We obtained interesting results that certainly have scientific novelty and significance, and though they have certain limitations mentioned here, can be taken as reliable. As for the study itself, I would like to characterize the applicant as a very thorough and responsible approach. And that is why the study took a long time, more than 3 years, and Anastasia decided to conduct several stages in her study, which provided additional information for food for thought, and this responsible approach certainly enabled the author to obtain her interesting results. Also, as was mentioned already by the chairman, when he introduced the applicant, the results were tested, and here I would also like to emphasize this proper scientific activity and publications, because not every applicant has 18 published papers, 3 articles in Q1 journal, monograph, co-authored. And here I should mention numerous speeches at Russian international conferences where the works of the author were discussed. So this testing process also took a long time. So in one word, I would like to support the applicant and her work. I thank you for your attention to this work, and as the academic advisor, I hope that Anastasia Grigoryevna will not stop here, but considering she will continue with the good recommendations she received from the Dissertation Council members. Thank you, Olga Ivanovna. Since we are working in the remote access mode, do we have any unanswered questions? Can we see and hear each other well? All is well, right? Yes, that's correct. Now, before we vote, we have 2 options. Either we take a technical break, or we continue without a break. Do we need a break? No, we don't. Very well. As we don't need a break, let us continue and proceed to voting. We shall vote as follows. Each council member will make his conclusion. There will be no break. We will all remain in this room. We will vote openly. I don't think we need any private discussions. Yet each council member will announce his decision individually. Viktor Sergeyevich, please help us. Let us start. I fully support awarding the degree of candidate of sociological sciences to Anastasia Amirkhanian. Next, Irina Andreevna, your opinion. I support the work of Anastasia Grigoryevna and as candidate of sociological sciences, specialty 220004, Yelena Viktorovna. I certainly support the work of Anastasia Grigoryevna Amirkhanian, and I believe the work is a success. It corresponds to all their requirements, and the author herself deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Sociological Sciences, Specialty 220004, Social Structure, Social Institution and Processes. So today we are discussing a high-quality independent study. Thank you, Yelena Viktorovna. Alevtina Viktorovna, your opinion? I think this study, this thesis by Amirkhanian Anastasia Grigoryevna is a comprehensive, complete study, and she deserves being awarded the degree of Candidate of Sociological Sciences. So your decision is positive. Okay. Thank you, colleagues, for us to... So we needed 3 votes. We got 5 votes. Everybody voted for. All the 5 council members voted for awarding the degrees. So the decision to award to Amirkhanian Anastasia Grigoryevna the degree of Candidate of Sociological Sciences. So we voted. Okay, let me repeat. I vote for awarding the degree. So the decision to award to degree of Candidate of Sociological Sciences, Specialty 220004, Social Structure, Social Institutes and Processes, is made. Dear colleagues, since our session is held with some council members working in the remote access mode, do council members, the applicant and others present have any criticism or remarks regarding the procedure? No. No, all went well. So I asked everybody. That was a question for everybody. Thank you. Now let's give the floor to the degree applicant for her closing remarks. Dear council members, dear chairman of the Dissertation Council, let me thank you for devoting your time to my work. I'm very grateful. I'd like to thank my academic advisor, Olga Ivanovna Borodkina, who supported me in one way or another. She helped me. She helped me with my difficult work. I'm really grateful to many people who supported me in this difficult work. I wish you health and prosperity. Anastasia Grigoryevna, I congratulate you on behalf of the council members. I wish you success in your future work, and I hope that you will continue exploring this topic. Young researchers should move the science forward. I declare our session closed. I thank everybody for your participation and hope we will all see each other again in the future. Thank you and goodbye.